Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. It's great to see you. My name is Rip Sullivan. I represent the 48th District, which is a piece of McLean and a big chunk of Arlington. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today because we are united in the fight against gun violence. We're here today because we've seen too many lives cut short when a domestic dispute escalates, or because a child picked up a weapon left unattended, or because a disturbed individual set out to terrorize his school or his workplace, or because a veteran struggling with PTSD couldn't bear the thought of living another day. We're here today because thoughts and prayers are not and have never been enough. We're here today because we know, just like a firefighter knows, that adding more flames is not going to put out a fire, that adding more weapons is not how you curb gun violence. We are here today as Democrats to speak out against gun violence and suggest real solutions. Now, before I introduce my terrific colleagues here to talk about their bills, I want to spend just a moment talking about a bill that I put in along with my friend Delegate Chris Hurst. Imagine this, ladies and gentlemen. A young man's been exhibiting suicidal tendencies. He even tells his mom that he wants to kill himself and he has a gun ready to use. But imagine that before he pulls the trigger, a police officer sees him getting ready to hurt himself, is able to talk him down and take the weapon from him. The man survives. We would hail that law enforcement officer as a hero for saving a life. What my bill would do would allow law enforcement to do just that, but the day before. Get a gun out of that person's hand the day before he or she tries to harm themselves. It includes due process measures that would ensure that person's Second Amendment rights are protected and allow that person further access to the court to get his or her gun back. But what it would do is allow concerned family members and other individuals close to some gun owner whom they believe is a threat to himself or someone else to go to their local Commonwealth's attorney or law enforcement officer and request that they seek a risk warrant. And if the law enforcement concurs that the person's an immediate risk to himself or others, the Commonwealth's attorney or law enforcement officer could then go before a judge to ask a risk warrant be issued so that we could remove that gun from that imperiled person. The gun owner could, as I said, then go before the judge and ask to get it back, subject to a judge's finding. Lots of due process in this bill protecting this person's Second Amendment rights. This is a bill that we know, ladies and gentlemen, would save lives. It will help curb gun-related suicides in Virginia, and the statistics for gun-related suicides in Virginia are just through the roof. More people have hurt themselves with guns, killed themselves with guns in the last decade than have died of opioid overdoses, and we call that a crisis. So I hope my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will look favorably on this bill. I look forward to working with Delegate Hurst to get it across the finish line. So enough about my bill. Up next, I want to introduce my dear friend Delegate Kathleen Murphy, who's going to talk about H.R. 31 and H.B. 650.
Thank you, Rick. Thank all of you for being here to talk with us about such important issues. This is my fourth session in the House of Delegates. And in each session, I have offered what I believe to be rational bills to prevent lives from being lost to gun violence. This year I proposed a bill, H.R. 650, to reinstate the one handgun a month limit. For 19 years, while this was in place, it helped curtail gun trafficking. And as you all know, Virginia has been identified as a major source of illegal guns up and down the coast. This bill failed. No surprise. This year I asked for a rule change, H.R. 31, a rule change to keep guns out of the hands of those in the gallery of the House of Delegates. I asked this only be enforced during session. I asked that the House be provided with the same protection that is provided to our senators. This would not infringe on anyone's Second Amendment rights. I didn't ask that it be banned from the entire General Assembly. but it would go a long way to ensure the safety of our members on the floor and our visitors in the gallery. Because we all know it only takes one bad actor, one angry person to cause real harm. I recognize this is the people's legislature. I simply ask that guns not be allowed in the gallery that is above and behind us. Scott Taylor, who's a former member and a former Navy SEAL, said that's the worst place for someone intending harm to be, above you and behind you. We are, in fact, on the floor as sitting ducks. If someone wanted to hurt us, it'd be easy enough to do it. And before any good guy with a gun could get that bad guy with a gun, it is very likely, in fact, it's almost absolutely, positively true that someone would be injured or killed. This rule failed to pass. We have, as a nation, experienced the tragedy of gun violence and mass shootings way too many times. It's happened in our churches, in our schools, at music venues. It has happened way too many times for us to continue to sit silent. The list is long. And I know the heartbreak of losing a loved one firsthand. So for me, this is not a political issue. For me, this is personal. It is time that people stood up and demanded an end to the senseless loss of life due to gun violence. It is time to say no more. Just this past election, I think we got a clear indication that the people of Virginia want change. I know I do. Thank you for being here and supporting us in our efforts.
Thank you, Kathleen. Now we're going to hear from Delegate Betsy Carr and, what is it, HB 597.
Good morning. I put forth several gun bills this session. My constituents have made it clear to me that reducing gun violence in our communities is a top priority for them. So I put in bills about reducing the number of magazines, about bump stocks, and having two things that I think are really interesting and important this time. House Bill 602 would require that a person demonstrate in-person competence in order to qualify for a concealed gun permit. Right now, essentially, somebody can sit on the sofa, apply for the concealed gun permit, and get that without showing any competence in that. And another one, I think that is really important. I've heard from this from some family members who are living out of state. It does not cost anything. Our concealed gun permits are cheaper here than they are in some other states. So that there's some other state constituents who are applying for a concealed gun permit here in Virginia because it's a cheaper price for them to pay, and then they do not have to ever come here to use the gun, but they're going to use it in their own state, having gotten a cheaper permit. So these are just some little things, all part of the big thing about having our communities safer, to getting rid of gun violence, which is such an epidemic here in Virginia. Thank you for being here this morning with us.
Thank you, Betsy. Delegate Tyler is next with HB 721.
Good morning. The bill I'm discussing today is House Bill 721 that was passed by definitely 4-2 in my subcommittee on militia, police, and public safety last week. And this is a bill that I co-paid with my good friend, Delegate Ken Plum. By a party line vote, but there are reasonable universal background check law, it was killed. I'm speaking on it today because I think it's important to note not only how important universal background checks are, but it's something that nearly all Virginians favor. The law today dictates that only sellers with a federal firearm license are required to obtain the results of a criminal background check prior to selling or transferring firearms. But private sellers, that meant they make sales online or at a gun show, are not required to perform criminal background checks. This is an enormous loophole that put the lives of Virginians at risk. The Virginia State Police reported a total of 3,584 denied firearm purchases in 2017 as a result of prohibited persons attempting to purchase firearms from federally licensed firearm dealers. In Virginia, those 3,584 criminals or potential criminals are able to purchase a gun with virtually no questions asked. Background checks are perfectly reasonable and immensely popular. This isn't even an 80% issue. This is a 90% issue. A poll in April of last year found that Virginia's voters supported universal background checks. 94 to 95% and even at least 90% Republican voters supported universal background checks. It seems that the only people that don't support these measures are those that get the checks with NRA in their campaign accounts. This bill is coming back up again next year because requiring background checks for all purchases will keep firearms out of the hands of potential criminals and keep Virginians safe. This is not a partisan issue, but rather a public safety issue, and will help to ensure that Virginia is part of the solution around preventing gun violence rather than part of the problem. In 2014, the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner reported that 901 Virginians had died from firearms. In 2015, it was 940. And in 2016, 1,058. We cannot allow this problem to get worse. We cannot stay idle as gun violence leaves more and more empty seats at dinner tables across the Commonwealth. This body missed an opportunity to serve the people of the Commonwealth by killing this bill last week. But however, we'll be back again next year. Thank you.
Next up is Delegate Bell with HB 91.
Thank you. Good morning. Bill I carried, HB 91, I believe is a very common sense bill. Delegate Carr had a very similar bill, and we jointly communicated on this bill. Unfortunately, it didn't pass. This bill is, as I said, common sense. It requires in-person training for those who seek a concealed carry permit. Currently, you can get a concealed carry permit with online training or video training. I'm a veteran. I served in the United States Air Force for almost 26 years. I was deployed to combat zones. When I was in the Middle East in dangerous areas and combat zones, I carried a firearm on my hip for 6 months. I had extensive training. Those who were around me who had firearms had extensive training. And one of the things that I learned as soon as I was trained was most accidents with firearms happen because the holster is improperly fitted, or the person who uses the firearm doesn't know the proper safing procedures. The current online training is far inadequate. It doesn't have eyes on from a qualified instructor to know if that holster is properly fitted. It doesn't see the safing procedures. You have to watch those things in real life, in real time, to make sure the person knows what to do. I believe, frankly, the groups like the NRA and the Virginia Civil Defense League who oppose this bill are missing a tremendous opportunity to provide low-cost, frequent training and to do a public good. I believe that concealed weapons, frankly, should have a much higher threshold for training. Because when you're walking in a mall, in a theater, or even a church, or in that very crowded gallery in the General Assembly, you don't know who has a firearm and who doesn't. And if that weapon's not safed, or the person doesn't know what they're doing, how to handle that weapon, an accidental discharge can occur and everyone's life is at risk. If it's open carried, at least you know the weapon is being handled properly. I think this is important. I believe in the Second Amendment. I'm a gun owner. But I think responsible gun ownership is important. And I believe every gun owner should have a background check, and they should definitely show that they are properly trained before they're given a concealed carry permit. The Supreme Court has ruled that a concealed carry is not a constitutional right, as some would argue. It's a special privilege, and that privilege should be accompanied with demonstrated competency. I believe this is a very common sense measure, and I really hope that we can arrive at the time where we can get away from the slippery slope argument. This isn't a slippery slope to take away Second Amendment rights. It's really a common sense measure to protect the majority of people, not just a loophole to allow a select few to continue to put us all in danger. So I will now pass back to my colleague. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, John. And now finally, we'll hear from Delegate McQuinn with HB 68.
Good morning. Good morning. My House Bill 68. This bill would give localities options to restrict firearms in public libraries. I brought this bill before last year. It was defeated, and however, it's here again and will be back next year if it's defeated once again. No one should think that this bill is a bill written to ban guns. However, library staff and patrons should not be intimidated and harassed by patrons with complaints carrying guns. Many children and parents and students attend libraries for a safe and welcoming environment to read, learn, study, and research without feeling threatened by weapons that they cannot defend themselves from. Libraries should perpetuate a family-friendly environment. Guns in libraries are distracting and leave patrons who frequent those facilities defenseless. In 1975, the General Assembly banned guns in school. We consider libraries to be an arm of our schools, as they have performed many educational functions, such as childhood literacy program, preschool reading circles, homework help, computer training, teen STEM programs, and summer reading challenges. And when I think about a library, I think primarily about young people going there to further their education. I originally introduced this bill and again continue to introduce this bill because a parent came to me upset. She was upset and very emotional to tell of her child's experience in the library. Her son, a fourth grader at that time, was at the public library when he ran into a man carrying a high-powered rifle. This sight traumatized the young man and made him fearful of going back to the library. This is unacceptable. And in light of all of the recent and horrifying events involving gun violence across this nation, we must be sensible and sensitive to the fact that tragic situations will continue to plague our nation. Hopefully, we will protect those who visit innocent environments like our libraries. It is critical that we provide for all citizens a safe and supportive environment at our public libraries and other places. This bill will help to encourage all who go to the library, who attend the library, to read, learn, and write, to feel that we have provided them a safe environment free of guns coming into their space. Thank you.
Thank you, Dolores. I'm sure any of my colleagues would be happy to answer questions or individually after we're done. Any questions you want to ask now?
Any members of the media have questions? Otherwise, we can do one-on-ones if people want to talk to any of our speakers one-on-one.
Sure, we'll be available after. Thank you for coming,
Thank
ladies and
you.
gentlemen.